Welcome to Well Good Movies, the podcast which asks which movies are well worth watching and remembering for all time. Every episode we discuss a different piece of film history to decide if it should make its way into our movie vault. Filled with questions, trivia and crazy challenges, it's the perfect way to deep dive into a myriad of movies. But don't just take my word for it. Here's a glimpse of what to expect in today's episode.
I think it should be noted that though my cameras have been, the screen in front of me has been frozen for the entirety of this call so far, it unfroze for that entrance.
I understand why.
My internet knew how important it was.
And for what it's worth, I obviously didn't hear anyone's reaction, but from what I could see from the cameras, Mary was losing it.
Honestly, it's one of my favourite movie quotes, and the fact that Dave, I've never seen Dave look so uncomfortable, so when you stroked his ear, it was wonderful.
All right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
Are you not entertained? I'll be back. Here's Johnny. Oh, hi, Mark. They call me Mr. Tibbs.
I'm Batman. It's not the car. It's a silly movie. I'll miss you, my pretty.
To infinity and beyond.
You're only supposed to blow the bloody doors off.
Well, good movies.
Hello and welcome to Well Good Movies, the podcast which asks which movies are well worth watching and deserve to be remembered for all time. I'm your host, David Osger, and I'm being a bit more quiet at the moment as all the Well Good Movies crew are asleep. Wake up! There we go. So recently we've announced we have more and more frequent guests which will be joining us, and hopefully now they are alert and ready for this episode and not asleep like the titular character of the film we're talking about today. So let's get to it. So joining me over in VHS Corner this week is our very own Queen of the Scots. It's Mary Munoz. Hello, Mary.
I've never been called that before. I think I will keep that title just from now on. That's how I should be addressed.
I hope it doesn't go the way of Mary, Queen of the Scots, however.
Well, what's a little beheading between friends?
Hey, that was, I don't know my English well enough. We need die here, but was it the English? We're not going to do it, certainly anyway, so nah. you're safe. But yeah, originally I was going to put something like Scottish correspondent, and I was like, wait, we're talking about like kings and queens and stuff. There is an obvious choice here.
Yeah, and I do give off that sort of regal air. I totally get why you've gone for that. It's the accent.
and Grogu has been knighted now, so your son is of royalty. It all makes sense. So it all makes sense, yeah. So Mary, as I said, you're over in VHS Corner this week. How is it over there? Reviews so far says it's a bit dusty, but it's not too bad.
Definitely a new experience to be in VHS Corner. It does feel like someone has to clear away the cobwebs. It might require a little bit of magic, although I know that is banned in this particular film. But no, nice and comfy. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. And just for like a tease in terms of what we're talking about today, what is your kind of vibe or feelings towards this particular film studio, as we haven't talked really about Disney in a very long time?
Yeah, I mean, they're not covering themselves in glory at the moment, are they, with the ongoing SAG-AFTRA strike? I know Bob Iger has come out and said some pretty heinous things about being willing to replace various actors with AI and not giving two hits about a strike. Unfortunately, it's so wrapped up in my childhood viewing that does leave for a level of conflict. And this film in particular is a film that I've been obsessed with for a long, long time because it contains one of my all-time favourite movie villains.
Awesome. Well, yeah, it's going to be a fun one. Definitely a lot of history to delve into and a lot of facts as well. So we look forward to going through all of that. And yes, a fantastic villain. So can't wait to talk all about that. But obviously legacy is going to be a big part of this film, so we need some extra help there as well. So joining us over in the movie vault this week, we are joined by another agent of chaos on the podcast. It is our good friend Liv Mackinder. Hello, Liv.
Hello. I don't know if I should be complimented or insulted by Agent of Chaos, but I will take it.
If you hadn't given us a Christmas film in June, then that title wouldn't have been given to yourself. But, that considering that was your last appearance, it has to be the one you're given, especially because I think about 2 episodes ago, Sarah had a similar title because she was involved in the whole Demolition Man saga, if you will. So yeah, there's a lot of chaotic people on this podcast, so it's a compliment, don't worry.
Exciting, very exciting. Well, I am looking forward to bringing a bit of chaos to, I suppose, one of the more traditional films I've seen on this podcast.
Yeah, and I guess in a way it does kind of fit with previous episodes you have done in terms of talking about older films, but films that you would consider like Boxing Day films, where you did that episode with us and we were talking about things like Mary Poppins, you were talking about Bridge Over the River Kwai. So in a way it kind of feels fitting, but then in some ways it is very different to Willy Wonka or Thunderbirds.
All classics in their own right, though. I will stand by that.
Exactly. So yeah, we look forward to going over the different elements of this film and everyone's different viewing experiences. But I can't help but feel that somebody's missing.
Well, what a glittering assemblance. Royalty, nobility, the gentry, and how quaint, even the rabble. Sup, guys?
That honestly might be the best 2 minutes of my life, just so far.
I think it should be noted that though my cameras have been, like, the screen in front of me has been frozen for the entirety of this call so far, it unfroze for that entrance.
I understand why.
My internet knew how important it was.
Welcome, Craig. Sorry, we almost forgot about you, I know, but you know, it's kind of traditional for somebody to crash the party when having these kind of discussions, I guess.
I'm sure it's just my invitation was lost in the mail. I'm sure that's all it was.
So yeah, we had to do a classic little Sleeping Beauty nod, and I thought, how can I introduce Craig in this episode? Any references to Maleficent? I thought, well, what better way than, to accidentally lose his invitation.
And for what it's worth, I obviously didn't hear anyone's reaction, but from what I could see from the cameras, Mary was losing it.
Honestly, it's one of my favourite movie quotes, and the fact that Dave, I've never seen Dave look so uncomfortable, so when you stroked his ear, it was wonderful.
The thing is, that's the one part we did not rehearse. So, in the last episode, very much a massive genre jump here, but we were discussing Dr. Sleep. And in the end, I believe for the first time in a while, David was able to come out on top in the end game. Basically looking at sequels and the years after they came out after the original. So David decided to go with his film selection, bringing us into Disney as an era that we've not really discussed to a significant extent on this show, but going back all the way to Sleeping Beauty. So this is the film which follows the story of after being snubbed by the royal family, a malevolent fairy places a curse on the princess, which only a prince can break, along with the help of 3 good fairies. So, being a classic Disney animated film, there is no one sole director, but there are a number of different sequence directors. So, in total, you have directed by Les Clark, Clyde Geronimi, Eric Larson, Wolfgang Reiferman, Hamilton Lusk, and credit for story adaptation by Erdman Penner, additional story by Joe Rinaldi, Winston Hibbler, Bill Peet, Ted Sears, Ralph Wright, Milt Banter, with the original story, of course, being by Charles Perrault, music by George Bruns, concept art by Evelyn Earle, editing by Roy M. Brewer Jr. and Donald Halliday, starring as Princess Aurora or Briar Rose, depending on which point of the film you're in. We have Mary Costa. We have Bill Shirley as Prince Philip, the good one, not the dead one. Eleanor Audley as Maleficent. Verna Felton as both Flora and Queen Lear. Barbara Luddy as Merryweather. Barbara Jo Allen as Fauna. Taylor Holmes as King Stephen. And Bill Thompson as King Hubert.
Awesome. Right. Well, yeah. So let's get into our discussion then of Sleeping Beauty, all about its history, its legacy, the animation, the story, our experiences with it. This being a film from 1959, like other discussions we've had recently, whether it be films that we're talking about, which are from this era, like the 50s from the past, or films like Dr. Sleep, in which, it has a lot of legacy behind it because of what it's based on or what it is preceding. And I guess this kind of is a bit of both in some ways, because this film is very much helped by the legacy of the Disney studio and Walt Disney himself and the films that came before it, such as Snow White, Cinderella. This is a very well-known film, and its kind of blueprint and its kind of look and style is felt throughout so many aspects, I think, of pop culture, but also the theme parks of Disneyland, Disney World, etc. But also this original story, like many Disney stories, originates from, classic fairy tales, etc. This one is, based more specifically on a ballet, which was completed in 1889 and includes very famous music from Tchaikovsky, which is the Sleeping Beauty ballet. But yeah, Walt Disney at this time really wanted to tell another kind of princess story after Snow White and Cinderella. So, Mary, you've said about how this was, a favorite of yours. Growing up, you've looked a lot into the kind of history and, the influences of Sleeping Beauty over the years. But before we get into your sort of memories, etc., can you give us a bit more context as to what was the thinking behind going into this film, its production, and how it was made and why it was made the way it was?
Sure. So I think Walt Disney actually first considered making this back in, I think it was 1938, but for whatever reason, the project didn't get off the ground. And he then revisited it back in 1950. And obviously there's a huge gap between 1950 and its release date in 1959, which should tell you that there was a lot of problems and delays in actually getting this project off the ground. So I think it's the 16th feature film for Disney, and it came sort of off the back of Cinderella in 1950, Alice in Wonderland in 1951, Peter Pan in 53, and Lady and the Tramp in 1955. But for whatever reason, production was constantly bogged down. It was plagued by delays, and actually it ended up costing Disney $6 million to produce, making it the most expensive animated feature for the studio at that time. And surprisingly, it only grossed just over $5 million at the box office, so it was essentially a flop. It's only in re-releases, I think in the 70s and then maybe in the later 90s, that it actually started to gain a bit of momentum and gain an audience as well. And it's a shame because Disney at the time wanted to go out of his way to tell a different kind of princess story. That was what he said. He wanted to make it different from Snow White and Cinderella. And for whatever reason, it just didn't land with audiences at all. So although it had the sort of brilliant foundations of the well-known ballet and the well-known fairy story, it actually didn't perform the way it was expected to. So despite the fact that it's often seen as, one of the biggest and best in the Disney canon, it actually didn't perform well at the time. And there was a sort of element of perhaps that the princess story wasn't the way to go anymore, and should they continue telling these types of stories? And actually, on reflection, it could have been an animated film that took the studio down a different route because of the failure it essentially had. So it's interesting reading up on that, because I look back on it and I just think it's so lavish, it's so beautiful to look at, but it was just completely plagued with problems from the offset. I mean, we're talking 20 years really to get it off the ground properly, and then box office flop, which is just not what you think when you think of Sleeping Beauty.
No, and I think in some ways it is classic of a lot of Disney, especially when the man himself, or whether through the studio, tries to be more experimental. And I think what has always drawn me to the studio, and the fact that obviously it plays so heavily on the childhood of people who grew up in the 90s, but I think that was a big part of people's childhood, especially because you had the kind of the vault, not the movie vault, the Disney vault at that time, which, has now been opened essentially, and everyone can see it on Disney Plus. And obviously there's a lot of people out there who actually are like, maybe you should go back to that, for all their failings and stuff, strikes aside. Regardless of that, I think that adds to the kind of like the magic and the formula of Disney of having these kind of like, treasured items, which, they re-release every few years. And as you said, Mary, that is what eventually made Sleeping Beauty more profitable. And I think it's what made people like us see that film when we were young, whereas like other films that might come out in the 50s, 60s, 70s, they weren't released when we were growing up. So what was the likelihood of us seeing those films? And Disney really has always been the kind of exception for that, in which you are more likely to see something from the 50s, 60s, 70s because of that strategy they've had of sort of, re-releasing them. And I guess to some extent now their remakes are kind of like a version of that. But I think what I find fascinating about Disney is their eras. And it's not like any other film studio, because it's like a film studio has kind of gone, well, this is, our cinematic universe, if you will. These are the types of films that we're going to make. And they're all going to have similar themes and similar styles and similar ways of being influenced or adapting stories, and you can really see how they change through the eras. You can see how, like, in the 90s that you had this Renaissance era. You can see how in the 80s things got more dark and they were maybe going through more financial difficulties. And maybe that's happening a bit now because, again, they're sort of facing the troubles of social media and all these other things. But I think really when you look at Sleeping Beauty, especially when you look at after it, the fact that you had films like 101 Dalmatians, Aristocats, there's very much a difference of like, oh, scale back the animation. And as much as people, love films like 101 Dalmatians, it's undeniable there is a massive difference in the quality of animation with that film. And I think that is what's fascinating, is that it reminds me a lot of when you look at the history of something like Fantasia as well, in which Walt Disney's like, I want to have this very kind of experimental story. This is what I want to do. This is how I want to tell it. And then afterwards going, oh, well, that cost us a lot of money and actually people weren't as into it as we thought. But I think that, us kind of creative lovers and people who grew up with Disney can appreciate it now and say, well, thank God for that, because we are getting to see people's creativity brought together. And it's a great thing about animation.
Yeah, well, if you look at, so again, part of the reason the production was held up is because usually Disney at that point were recycling pieces of animation. So literally just swapping in a head or, a slightly different background. And he didn't want to do that for this. He wanted to create something completely from scratch, which we can obviously see in the beautiful artwork. It's like nothing else. It doesn't look like anything else. It doesn't feel like anything else. And we're obviously looking back at that now and appreciating it. But at the time, it just must felt like a money pit because the animators were getting fed up and they were bored and they were sort of, protesting against having to redo stuff. And then they decided that, okay, well, we'll give you this project from scratch. We don't get bored. Don't, just recycle the same old. But it just completely spiraled. And actually, I think when you do look at the likes of, as you said, 101 Dalmatians, one, it's moved completely away from the princess narrative because now we're into the 60s and actually that whole damsel in distress thing probably isn't flying sort of culturally and socially as well. But yeah, you can see that the animation, as much as I love 101 Dalmatians, is a complete step down from, you look at this and it's like looking into a painting. So, and then you look at 101 Dalmatians and it's just not anywhere in the same league. But it is interesting that almost similar to Fantasia, tried to do something experimental, tried to give the animators what they wanted in terms of not being bored and not reusing stuff, and actually it just became a bit of a disaster. So it was interesting reflecting on that, because as I say, I've always loved this film and I just always thought it was lovely to look at, but then when you actually sort of delve into how long it took, and because obviously as well they were capturing live action, like actors performing in the role so that they could have that as a reference point, and that just slowed everything right down and it took much longer for everything to be finalised. You can kind of understand why it's become this sort of almost like a sort of crazy passion project. And I just sort of in my head, I'm imagining Disney going, no, we must keep going with this. And I really like this idea. And the animators being like, I could get paid the same to go and join another studio and not have all this hassle. But it did seem like he was so determined to drive this project through and to sort of give the world his version of this story.
Yeah, and I think very much it's a lot of what it's, again, response to other films, and that's why I find it interesting in terms of like a timeline, because you can look at other studios, but obviously there's always creatives changing. It's a bit like Pixar in some ways, in the sense that it's the same studio and they're telling similar stories, and obviously them being part of Disney helps that. But with other studios, it is usually different production teams, different directors, and different people behind the scenes. Business people are always changing. Whereas Disney, again, it tends to have like a long tenure of people who work on these things, and sort of rise through the ranks, like you said. And I think the one, as you said, you can see the differences with the princess narrative. You can see how Disney has kind of made something like Cinderella. Snow White said, I want to do that again, but I want to make it different. And you can tell watching this film compared to Snow White and Cinderella that he wants to cut out more of the antics. He doesn't want as much of the cuddly animals, jumping around and, let's spend half an hour with some mice. There's not as much of that. It's more focused on human or human-esque characters in the instance of the fairies. So I think that is interesting in terms of that change, but also his dedication to animation. I mentioned Fantasia, but also I think Mary Blair is a big one to mention, because I think he said that he was always disappointed that her concept art wasn't realized into the films that they were making. So she was a big part of films like Cinderella and Alice in Wonderland. The picture I think she did of Cinderella's castle was like one of his favorite images, and inspired a lot of what came later and what happened in the parks, etc. But the fact that her work and her kind of like style of these like kind of like soft and roundish and, you know, so more elaborate abstract designs were making it into the final piece. So he wanted to do that here with Sleeping Beauty as well. I think is really interesting. The fact that he said, you know, here's almost an artist and I want this artist to sort of take charge. And sometimes you see with different projects and stuff in which that either goes, you know, very badly because other people don't sort of like quite get on the, you know, the vision with them, or it can kind of like encourage creativity from everyone. I think with here they are lucky in the sense that the animators were so involved in the process that they were able to still have their Disney style with the characters, and they do blend quite nicely, I think, with that kind of tapestry stained glass window look, because they've still got a bit more of the rigid designs on the clothes and stuff like that, the beards and the hair, but there's still enough of a Disney look to kind of make the animators still like, oh, I'm still doing, you know, this animated piece, etc. So I think the films around it and the influences of why Disney did this is, like you said, maybe just as fascinating. In terms of like our memories then, Liv, you were saying before about you had an interesting experience with this because it was one that you thought you remembered, but actually on rewatch, maybe you were overlapping with other Disney films and you kind of saw it in fresh eyes.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because what I remembered from it were what I describe as the violent moments. So things like Maleficent's entrance, Philip out with his sword, these kinds of really intense things. But I remembered them going on for a lot longer, being a lot more dramatic, being a much larger portion of the film, and that kind of thing. And there are so many iconic moments that I completely forgot about. And I know I must have watched this film very regularly up until I was around 10. And it just disappeared from my mind. But I suppose as a child, you're probably more likely to remember the scary bits. So perhaps that's what it is. I don't know. It's interesting, though, ironic even, because what you were saying before about them doing something different. My theory is that one of the reason it flopped is because it is both a romance and a kind of actiony horror in a way. And those are kind of targeting two different audiences. And in the end, it targets neither one. But in doing this, I think they made it so much more memorable in the long term, because I do remember those iconic, scary moments, even though I don't necessarily remember as much of the rest of the film until I rewatched it. So I suppose it's pros and cons in doing that. Yeah, no, it was very strange.
As Mary said earlier, I guess going into the 60s, things are changing a lot. And if you look at films from, 1959, whether it would go into like 1960 or not in terms of what was considered its box office, etc. But you do have something like Ben-Hur is like, the biggest film. But then you have things like The Shaggy Dog from Buena Vista, which is essentially Disney. So again, very much different vibes of, comedy. And then you got things like North by Northwest, like coming into there. And some like It Hot, so again, there's very much a more focus on comedy, or if you're having an epic, make it, very epic, or make it, a thriller in the case of something like Hitchcock. So,
sorry, just to double check. So Sleeping Beauty and North by Northwest came out in the same year.
Yeah.
Is 1959 just a secretly based year for film?
Possibly. But yeah, I think, as you said, Mary, maybe at that time that the princess thing was still kind of dated even at that time. And I think now we can look at it more rose-tinted glasses. And what I think is interesting, which ties in with, what I remember of it when I was young, was I didn't own it as like the official video. I think there was certain Disney films that would be like, yes, I will buy that, or my family will buy it. My parents would buy it for me. And then there was certain like maybe B-level Disney films that would be like, we will record that off the television. And I remember Sleeping Beauty, and that tended to maybe happen a bit more with like some of the princess ones. I think I owned Snow White maybe because it was more of a legacy thing, like, the first Disney film. And I remember that one watching it, and there was a kind of like behind the scenes feature like at the end of it, etc. But Sleeping Beauty I remember more because it was like a recording of it. And I remember like that end dance sequence, and it was almost like, when the credits kind of go to the side and then like the little box of like up next, I remember something like that happening. But I remember watching it a lot, and because you kind of think of that vibe of like, this long forgotten kind of like vibe of movies and singing and dancing and princesses. And I think even as a young kid you can kind of get invested in that and sort of get swept along with the narrative and the vibes of that, which again, maybe in 1959-60 was kind of like, oh, well, this is old hat. But when you're watching it then in the 90s or something, you're like, oh, this like wonderful time. But, you don't have the context of what it was actually like maybe at the time it was released. But
for what it's worth, our household was the same, except that what you deem as a B tier.
Well, I'm saying my parents would have recorded it, so maybe their opinions.
Yeah, so we had Sleeping Beauty on video. Our recorded straight from TV was Sword in the Stone.
Mary, you said this, was a big one from your childhood. What specifically then with this film do you remember, and why is it connected with you so much?
So I think this is the first film that I realised that I wanted to be a Disney villain, not a Disney princess. I think I never wanted, to be rescued by a prince or anything like that. I saw Maleficent enter in a sort of, thrash of lightning and the green smoke, and she had these fabulous cheekbones and that beautiful transatlantic accent that all Disney villains seem to have. And I was like, I want to be her. I like her better than the princess. And to be honest with you, the more I've watched it growing up, the more I just think, yeah, I probably would be that petty to put an entire kingdom to sleep just because I was slightly annoyed that I didn't get an invite somewhere. I like this. I like the fact that she's just really angry. And as I say, when you watch it as a child, it's the spectacle, it's the colours, it's the luscious soundtrack, it's the sort of drama and the sort of horror elements to it, because as a child, even seeing Maleficent sort of transform into the big dragon, that was quite scary, I seem to remember. But you watch it as an adult and, you look at it slightly differently, or maybe it's just me. I watch it and go, there's a lot of sexual tension between Prince Philip and Maleficent here. Actually, I don't think he's that interested in Aurora. There's a lot of chains and whips going on in Maleficent's dungeon, but that's just my reading of it. And yeah, it's just always been a classic. I have the special edition of it even as an adult, which is out on display all the time. And as I say, it just for me was the turning point where I was like, I'm not interested in princesses. I like the bad guys.
Yeah, I think it's like you said, regardless of whether you're into the romance or the princess stories, I think even with something like Beauty and the Beast when I was younger, I remember that one being one which I kind of watched and would be like, yeah, this is fun. I could appreciate a lot about it. But, I wasn't swept up by the kind of like, oh, she's transformed him, and all this kind of stuff. I think as I grew older, I gained a lot more respect for it because of how impressive the music was and the script and the animation and that kind of stuff. Whereas, again, like when I was young, something like Aladdin, Lion King, Oliver and Company even, and maybe something else which is kind of like, going for the kind of Sleeping Beauty effect of like, oh, well, let's try something fantasy like and see how that goes, was The Black Cauldron. I remember having that on video, which is again a very famous kind of like failed Disney movie. But I remember watching that one a lot as a kid because I liked, medieval stuff and swords and knights and all that kind of stuff. But again, with Sleeping Beauty, it is one that always was ingrained in my mind because I think a similar thing. It was more, the dragon, like we said, but Maleficent's entrance, I really remember that. And you're right, Mary, now I think about it, I remember being really creeped out by that scene where Aurora is hypnotized by the spinning wheel, where she has to go and sort of touch it, and it's that music, the doo 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 doo, and she's like entranced by it. I remember that being quite like scary. Theme. So that was quite scary as a child.
That's one of the best scenes in the entire film. I absolutely love that.
And there's just so many like visual things which I'm sure we'll get into. But yeah, I think the visuals of it, the music, all of it kind of sort of like really ingrains and sticks with you, and it's just kind of like a very enjoyable film on a number of levels. So again, whether you're into princesses or whether you're into like, medieval stuff and knights and dragons and all that kind of stuff, or the music or art, there's something there for everyone in some way, I think. And I think that's why it becomes embedded in people's brains so much. And I think Maleficent, as you said, is also a big part of that. Her legacy, has been massive. Whenever they have the collection of villains, you often see T-shirts, as Mary is repping right now, and different costumes and stuff for her. They often do like Disneyland and Disney World. I know they do like Halloween time. They'll have like the villains come out and do a show, and she's always there, as one of the lead ones, etc. And it is because you watch this performance in this film, I think is it Eleanor Audley. It's just such a powerful performance, and just that kind of, like you said, the entrance and the visuals really sticks with you. And yeah, she does. I won't say like tops all of the other characters, but she does stand out as one of the best parts of this film, definitely. But also I think even like the fairies to an extent, it's that classic thing of Disney, like focusing on the side characters in some ways. But as a child, I remember being like, why are we spending so much time with these kind of assistant characters, what kind of like, the wizard type characters. As somebody who grew up on Star Wars, you are used to your Luke Skywalker. This is the main character, etc. Whereas Disney quite often was like, no, spend time with like these three randomers, and you're like, okay. And I think there's something about that, even when you're young, in which you're like, it's not the norm, but you're kind of entranced by it. I guess it's something different, and it's kind of Walt Disney's effect of kind of like giving you something which is a bit creatively more experimental in a way.
See, for me, they were just the main characters of the film. I know that obviously Sleeping Beauty is the title character, but I think it's a lot easier to go into this film just going like, no, this is the story of like three fairies who basically try to avoid an entire kingdom being completely screwed up. Because everything's from like sort of their perspective. It's their actions that save Aurora in the first place. It's their actions that make sure that she doesn't die. It's their actions that raise her. It's their actions that help Prince Philip. So I got really annoyed a few years ago. Fun fact, it is the 10-year anniversary. I promise you this is related, so don't cut me off. It's the 10-year anniversary of the Pokemon X and Y games, and that is famous for introducing the fairy type, which controversially, and by that I mean I hate it, are immune to dragons. And I raged on the internet going, in what media do you ever see a fairy beat a dragon? And the only example that somebody came up with was Sleeping Beauty. And I was like, no, they enchanted a sword. So that argument should be still, anyway, regardless. So yeah, it's obviously their actions again in that situation just showed that they were just the ones constantly doing things. So that's why I just sort of got into that. This is my favorite of the classic Disney films. Just outright is my favorite.
But then where does it come when you're talking more modern Disney then, obviously?
Is Walt alive? Yes, it's classic. Is he dead? It's modern.
No, I mean, like, how does it compare with some of your favorite, more modern Disney films? Do you sort of separate them in your mind?
I mean, I kind of have to, right? Because I don't watch a film like this specifically on narrative, because I think we'll probably end up getting into discussion. But if you look at this film on like a somewhat narrative level, as you do for like a lot of classic fairy tale based films, things can fall apart at the seams quite quickly, especially considering that because one thing I've often talked about is the way in which you evaluate films with regards to modern sensibilities. There are a lot of things in this film that if they were made today, I would just be like, what the hell is going on? You shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah, completely agree with that. There was a couple of times where I was like, oh, don't remember that line of dialogue from, and you do kind of wonder, because how they talk about sort of fairy tales being bad for women in particular, because if you hear these stories as a young girl, you grow up and you expect that, all you're good for is basically finding yourself a husband. There was a couple of lines in this film where I was like, wow, you would not get away with saying that now. And it was very misogynistic, and I just do not remember that whatsoever.
There's an entire scene which is two guys drinking, eating, talking about how the one son is going to essentially bone and impregnate the daughter.
Yeah. And they talk about her being their most treasured possession, and I was like, I'm sorry. But again, I don't know, maybe I was just a feminist from the offset, but I just don't remember that being the case. Maybe that's why I vividly
remember that scene.
Well, I think that's the thing. I think one is tapping into partly, obviously, the attitudes of the time of production, but in some ways as well, it's the kind of what you see in Game of Thrones, etc. It's always, my lineage and my daughter will marry this person, and women were seen very differently in the 14th century in which like this film is.
And yet they see themselves as quite progressive. They go, well, it is the 14th century. A prince shouldn't have to marry a princess. He should have the ability to marry whichever peasant he finds.
So it almost as if like Disney is kind of trying to be edgy at that time, being like, oh, it's the 60s, 50s, in which like, yeah, people have a choice. But again, that was still not nearly as progressive as we are now. But yeah, I think obviously there's that idea that some people will say, they don't want to show their children certain Disney films and they don't want to teach them certain narratives. But I guess there's always the aspect of like, well, it's important to learn from good and bad moments in certain parts of history. But also I think that there is an element of like you get wrapped up in the story, but I don't think I ever saw it as a child and be like, yeah, that's real life. That is realistic. I think that there's that idea of something which would be unfortunate. I'm not saying this in the case of Disney films or the way that female characters are portrayed. I think something I felt watching this was kind of like, and it happens in multiple Disney films, which is weird because as somebody who grew up in the 90s, you have like Mulan or even Jasmine to an extent in which they have a bit more agency. And even if they do get, Jasmine, for example, get kidnapped, also taken advantage of in some ways, they still have like a bit of fight in them, or that they have a bit more character. They don't sort of just, lay there and cry like Aurora does in this film at one point. So I think that is the one thing that you feel watching this, like, oh, there literally is like nothing she does, and that's happens in Snow White as well. But I would say it would be unfortunate if people, going forward couldn't sort of see, these kind of romantic films and be like, differentiate, oh, that is romance, that is a story, it's a fantasy, it's a fairy tale, and knowing that is just not something realistic. I think as children, I think that we were able to kind of see that and acknowledge that, and I think it is important for kids to kind of acknowledge that difference. Do you know what I mean? Like there might be people who watch it and kind of go, oh, I want to be like swept away by a prince and stuff like that, which is fine. But as long as the parents say, well, just as long as you know that that's not literally how it happens, then that is the lesson to be made.
I do wonder what that says about, 4 or 5 year old me, that I didn't go, I want to be swept up by a prince. I want to be casting spells and have really good cheekbones. Like, I don't know. But I think for Aurora is, I think that was totally like psychologically balanced. I think Aurora for me is a bit of a, you've kind of touched on it there, like a sort of side character, because we see it through the fairies' perspective or through Maleficent's perspective, and she doesn't really have any agency at all. She's essentially given away as a child. Quite literally, she's betrothed to Philip, and then she's given away to the fairies, and then she's hypnotized by Maleficent. And I think, I'm sure this is right, I read somewhere that she has 18 lines of dialogue. So for a Disney princess, that's next to nothing. So actually, as far as agency goes, she basically has none. But I get what you're saying as well about, I think the look of it and the setting, not just the fact that it's prince and princesses, but just the actual era that it's set in, does allow you to take that step back and understand that it is a fantasy piece, and therefore not any, although I'm quite sure women were sold as property in the 14th century.
I mean, you say that about the like understanding that it's not real, and I feel like a lot of young girls would look at that and think, okay, it's not real, because they don't identify with that person or imagine that they want to be that kind of girl without any agency. But I could name hundreds of boys from my childhood who would act like the prince with their sword running around the playground and say to the girls, no, you're the girl, you're the princess, therefore you have to sit there. So on the one hand, yes, we know these are like outdated standards and this is a fantasy world, but not all children do, not if they want to be the hero.
And definitely, and unfortunately, yes. How many people are running around with their swords? I don't know which type of swords we're talking about. don't please,
Oh, David. Yeah, you're the one telling me going into this, we need to keep this PG.
I'm sorry, this is not a PG film. Like I said, on reflection, I'm watching this and going, the sexual tension in this is palpable. Like, there's no way this is a PG film.
But that
I mean, I also do respect any Disney villain who decides to call on the powers of hell.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah.
There's some bad lessons to learn from, the way the women are depicted and, like, do they have enough agency and stuff like that. But I think Liv has a good point in that there are characters like the prince and stuff. And the way he comes along and even grabs her at one point and is just like, oh, I saw you once upon a dream. And you're like, oh, it is a bit creepy.
Look, can we just agree that boys are stupid?
Yeah. So I think that...
I know, because notice that Liv didn't say that girls thought this was real. She said that boys were saying in the playground.
Look, I'm happy to say that. I'm happy to say that young boys are freaking morons.
Yeah. Either way, both genders are going to there's going to be people out there who take the wrong readings from it, but ultimately I think it's, important to look at this and go, oh, look how we've changed, etc. Just on the point of people being like, I'm not going to show my child that film. It's like, well, so I think
I'd also argue narratively in some way, insofar as like just the instant meeting of people, this is not the worst one. I think Snow White is still probably the worst one. Exactly. Because do they ever actually meet? before he just turns up in the forest, be like, "Oh, dead woman, snog."
Yeah.
No, because she sees his reflection in the well, does she not, when she's singing? I think, but that's it. It's just a reflection. They don't actually meet.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's stalker syndrome, is it not?
Yeah.
Liv, also in terms of your experiences from what you were saying earlier, that you remember a lot of the visuals of this, what are the reactions did you have on sort of like revisiting this, and can you sort of see some of the blueprints of this, as we were saying, in some of other animation or other Disney films in terms of inspiration, etc.?
Oh yeah, like I do think this film was an iconic trendsetter. I went through while I was watching the film, Googling a few different things, and I found out like this is the first time with a sword. This is the first time like where the male character gets a talking horse sidekick, which seems to happen a hell of a lot of the time after that. And then honestly, I do think this film needs a lot of credit from how Shrek would not exist without it. So many parallels in there. Which I appreciate a lot. But honestly, whilst like rewatching it literally yesterday, I did spend, other than appreciating the animation, most of the time in the back of my mind trying to work out whether they were trying to tell us it's okay to rebel against your parents and love who you want to love, or if they were trying to tell us, listen to your parents because they'll actually be right in the end. And I still, by the end of the film, could not work out which one they were going for. So that was most of what my brain was filled in for the whole film.
That is a good point, actually, because I was just trying to figure out in what scenario, but then I was like, oh wait, yeah, they're still sort of true.
Yeah.
Like King Cubit just at the end being like, I'm gonna have to deal with. Oh no, apparently it just worked out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like, oh, okay, the princess and the peasant girl are the same person. Great.
Super.
Yeah, like you might as well just listen to your parents in the first place. He didn't need to call off the wedding. His parents were right. But I can't work out if that's what they're going for or not. I can't work out how progressive they're trying to be.
I guess a lot of it is again, goes back to the adaptation of this film as well, is that, you know, in some ways it's a very small story. I think somebody at Disney described it as taking, you know, a kind of 5-paragraph story and turning it into like, you know, a 90-minute film. So a part of it then is trying to add, you know, a bit more kind of like drama and stakes, but taking what is very much a traditional ballet in this circumstance, but often with, you know, these adaptations, they are traditional fairy tales, often very dark, very grim. So there's stuff that they don't want to adapt. They kind of want to adapt the nice bits or change what they originally are. But I guess a part of it is through that, is trying to add like a bit more length to the film, a bit more drama to it. So I never saw it as they're trying to add, you know, say a certain message. And I think so much of Disney, Walt Disney especially, is kind of what we said, is that he just wants this vibe and he wants to get across this kind of like story. It is like what we've already mentioned, is the dragon and the sword fight and like the artistry of it. I think is kind of like the lessons, and the character progression is kind of secondary for him in that sense. You know, when you look again at something like Fantasia, he's like, I wanted, you know, people to feel this, and this is what they like experience. He wants it to be a more sensory experience. So, you know, I guess, but it's interesting where you then see again, like we said, the characters like Maleficent and the fairies. You know, I think that he obviously then has a lot of respect for kind of like older women, and like a lot of the animators, you know, apparently were really thrilled in animating those characters. You know, you see the one who plays Flora, I think she voices quite a lot of characters in Disney films. She's like the Queen of Hearts and Fairy Godmother in Cinderella. So, you know, it's an actress that he liked using. I like the story that they were saying, I think, about Fauna, that they were looking for inspirations for each of the fairies. And somebody said like, oh, there's this woman that I know, and, you know, you've got to meet her because she's kind of like this, what you would see from like a secretary back in like the, you know, the war, in which, you know, they're a bit bubbly and they're a bit all over the place and they're a bit scatterbrained. And they actually went to like go meet this woman, and she was, you know, as soon as he saw it, it was like, yeah, that's Fauna. And the fact that they've then constructed this character to be like this real life woman, I think it's not that they're just making them from like archetypes or types of people. They're literally going, oh, this woman is this character. And I quite like that. So I think, again, luckily for this film, unlike something like Snow White, I think that the cast at least balances out some of the bad representation for the younger characters by the fact that you've got a character like Maleficent, which even the film doesn't even try to kind of rag on her too much. They're not like, she's a horrible person, look how evil this person is, you know, like look how bad she is. It kind of does enjoy the villain aspect and the theatrics of what she is doing. You know, like none of the kingdom is there being like, oh my god, Maleficent, run away or anything. Obviously when she first arrives, they're just a bit spooked and, you know, frightened of her, and the fairies are kind of against her, but there's not this kind of like abundance of like anti-Maleficent. It's like she's almost a part of the narrative of like, we understand you are the villain in the story and we are the kings and queens and we all play these roles.
Yeah, the fact that there's no actual call to arms against her despite her doing this, right? Because I think other media, they would just be like, hunt her down and destroy her.
Yeah.
Whereas here they're just like, let's just keep Aurora safe for 16 years. Let's just not rock the boat. Apparently her forces of evil have been walking around inspecting every cradle in the land, and they haven't been slaughtered in their thousands. So I mean, my favorite thing about Maleficent is the fact that they do that right balance of just dignified evil, but just showing, like, will not deal with incompetence. The freak out that she has when the forces turn around, like, yep, we've been looking at every cradle, and she's like, every cradle, and it just starts wailing on it. My favorite line in the film is like, a disgrace to the forces of evil.
Yeah, that's what I wrote down as well. It's just the way she delivers it, like, they're a disgrace to the forces of evil, because again, no other character, like, and that's why I think her legacy has been so much like, she's the leader of the villain groups at Disneyland and stuff, because she's like, I am the embodiment of evil. But again, it's not like Chernabog kind of like, oh my god, like run for your life kind of evil. It's this kind of theatrical embracing evil, like she is this dark witch. And it's just a vibe.
Just a vibe. I absolutely love that. I think the fact that, I mean, she lives in the Forbidden Mountain, right? Which is obviously all like craggy and thorns. And I think they kind of just accept that she's just sort of living on the periphery. I assume that she just occasionally pops up, causes some drama, and then goes back to her evil lair. And they do seem very tolerant of her as a character. Like, you know, she did just threaten to murder their child, and they're like, oh, do you know what? We'll burn the spinning wheels, and we'll just make sure that we tuck Aurora away. Not like, you know, make sure we get her, get all of her army, all the rest of it. It's just, she'll go away for a wee bit, and we'll be fine. They're all very relaxed about, you know, this plume of green smoke that's just come into their life and decided to, you know, attempt infanticide.
Yeah, this is why I'm just genuinely surprised that because I think if I were a citizen living in that land, being like, you know, that like really, really evil, powerful woman that like lives nearby, that seems to really, really care about her reputation, why aren't we just doing everything we can to either kill her or just please her? Like, if all
just invite her to the parties.
Yeah, if all it takes for her to not be like a regicidal maniac is just a brief invite to, hey, so we've got a daughter now, you've got a naming ceremony, you're welcome to come, no obligation to come, but the invite's there, we want you there, you know, all hail Maleficent. If that's all it would take, I would just do that. I mean, it might cost me like, you know, a messenger, because she probably won't let him come back, but I'd just do that, like, you know, King Stefan.
I think the main thing for me, though, is also like there's always been this, you know, gag of like, oh, she wasn't invited to the party and everything like that. But when I rewatched it, I was kind of like, well, you know, again, I think it is this kind of like she just arrives for chaos, and it's kind of, it's not even like the evil queen in Snow White either. It's not this idea of like something specific like beauty and like, I must be the most, you know, beautiful in the land. And I think the actress also plays the wicked stepmother in Cinderella. And
she
again,
absolutely does. She does play Lady Tremaine.
So there again, a very kind of frightening character just from her looks and the delivery of her lines. But again, that is something a lot more personal. Whereas here, I think it's just, again, she just embodies this, you know, the powers of hell and the forces of evil. And she's just like, there is something which represents purity, and I need to go there and just, you know, make sure that I represent evil and kind of be like, nope, you know, like this isn't happening, and kind of rain on their parade, I guess. And it's just the confidence she has. The look of the character, I think, is amazing. You know, the horns with like, you know, like it's all wrapped up. The cloak she has, and how it seems to like sometimes be huge, sometimes a bit more like just kind of like restrained to her body. But
the pet raven.
Yeah, that's great. And when she like first arrives and they kind of like go to attack her, and she's like, you know, stand back, you fools, and all this. And it's the green fire. And I think I'm right in thinking that a lot of people have said that her skin was originally like a mistake, was it? That she wasn't meant to be like kind of greenish. She was meant to be more like either human skinned or like white or something. But I'm like, no, I'm glad that this happened because,
absolutely.
you know, it really adds to the look of the character. I think it's something that you kind of lose when you see, you know, the live action version, for example. I think that...
Do not start it.
But I think it's... it just adds to her kind of like iconic look, and it's such a, you know, visual look that she has.
The color palette is super well known for Maleficent as well, and it does, again, watching this as an adult, maybe I'm projecting, you know, she comes in and she's so angry that she's not invited. Did her and King Stefan have a wee fling? Did he give her a knockback? Is she jealous that he's chosen the sort of cookie cutter blonde wife and she obviously isn't that? I mean, I think the fact that she's this angry without seemingly any context other than just not getting an invite, I mean, she's just fabulous. Like, it's so over the top, it's so ridiculous. Imagine getting this upset over a tiny wee thing, and yet you would buy into her over Aurora as a character all day long. And I think it does come down to the fact that Aurora doesn't really have much to say or much to do. But yeah, you're just so much more invested in Maleficent as a character than I think the vast majority of the rest of the cast.
She just reminds me of a meme format from a few years ago, which is, is that your kid? I'ma kill it. Don't you do it. I'ma do it. Don't you do it. Damn it.
I love the scene where she, you know, captures Philip, and you know, that line of just like, you know, there was
and it gets
me.
a bit sexy.
Yeah, not something that crossed my mind until you said it, Mary, but I'm like, okay, yeah, I can see it. But yeah, when she's got the torch, and again, that shows off the color palette so well. But yeah, she's, you know, there was me thinking, you know, I was capturing a peasant and I've got, you know, myself a prince. You know, it's again, she is
How
like...
can you not think it's like she literally stands outside the door and purrs the words "come in," and he sort of floats in, and then she obviously ties him up with chains. It's like so overt in what it's doing.
No, and I think you're definitely right. I think it's just obviously so many of the Disney films. I suppose maybe again, like you look at something like Jafar and Ursula, they very much are on their own, and often Disney, it is kind of like the bumbling minions. You know, you look at Hercules as well. But it is just the fact that in this instance, that it is like she is the leader of this. You know, it is just her bumbling buffoon army that has done this, and she is the one that's kind of like captured Philip. She's the one that's put Sleeping Beauty to sleep. She is the one that's landed this curse. She's the one that turned into a dragon. So again, it's just a great, you know, empowering character.
I just think it's worth noting how incredibly iconic it is, not just visually of her entrance, but the fact that she as a character decided not to walk through the very easily walk-throughable door. And I just think that is brilliant, because that is definitely someone who would rather make an entrance and be the center of attention and scare people and show them how powerful you are, than do exactly the same thing but slightly less dramatically, and that has to be appreciated.
That brings me on to some more of the visuals, and this is often a thing with animation, is why does everything look so tasty in animation when you're looking at different foods? Like, that cake is embedded in my brain, like it's not even meant to be good. She's like folded in eggshells and stuff, but if somebody said to me, do you want to eat this cake, like this mixture, I'd be like, hell yeah.
You're talking about the falling over cake?
Yeah,
like,
the icing looks so good.
Yeah, not the good cake, not the finished one, which was magic. The messy cake. I was like, when I was young, I was like, that looks delicious.
See, for me, the food scene that I got was the again, like the two kings drinking scene.
Yeah.
Because I want to know, how good was that chicken leg that he was like, actively just throws it away, despite the fact there's loads of meat let off it. But also, insofar as my favorite, like, absolute no-name character, it's the guy, it's, what would you even call it?
Like a lute player?
Yeah, it's like the lute player. Just some of the expressions they give him as he's secretly trying to get drinks.
Which again, wouldn't happen now in a Disney film, but also...
But no, they give content warnings whenever someone's like smoking on Disney Plus at this point.
But I'm thinking... You know, some of the problems I've had with it in the past is like, it's like a lot of Disney films in which there's some antics and some japes and stuff, and, you know, it takes away from the story. And that scene to me always stood out as like, we're just filling in some time. There's some random song which they have.
See, I just see it as character. I think that all of the bits that are definitely add-ons, insofar as just not relevant to or not driving the story specifically, I just see it's just the film developing a lot of like individual character. Granted, not developing character in, you know, the areas that most people would expect you would develop it in, so far as your title character. But I just think there's a lot of like atmosphere and a lot of just genuine, like, there are lots of weird interactions in this film that sort of made me chuckle. I was, just because they went to the effort to make them. Like, one of my favorites is like the young Prince Philip when he first sees the baby Aurora. Just the face he does is like, this is your future wife.
Ew. Yeah, because I actually, every time I see that, I kind of think, oh, wouldn't it be funny if, like, you know, he's like, oh. And then I'm like, oh, wait, no, they actually do that joke. And I think, again, that's kind of like the more modern sensibilities creeping in there. On rewatch, though, I did appreciate that scene more. I think it stood out in the past to me as kind of like, what are we doing here? You know, this is separate to, you know, like what you want, the dragon and Maleficent and Sleeping Beauty, etc. I did appreciate it more this time. One, for the character animation, like I said, that Luke player, he's fantastic. I think because he reminds me so much, again, of like people you'd see in real life. You know, there's people who have very, like, you know, sort of like straight, crooked features and look a bit like, you know, sort of, you know, very side eye, like long hair. And it's the fact he's then doing that when, like, how can I get away with drinking this, you know, and how can I like put this underneath and all that kind of stuff. He's just such a character in himself, and he's just literally doesn't have like any lines or anything. So he's fantastic. And as I mentioned before, I think where you see the great visuals with like the fairies, I remember when I was young being really captivated by like when they turned small and they went into like that little jewelry box. I remember when I was a kid being like, oh my God, look at that giant cup. And they like walk into the cup and back out. It's just all those little touches. And I think the pink blue thing is amazing. I don't know if anyone has any like controversial opinions on this dress. Is it pink? Is it blue? Mary, what do you think?
It is blue for a
Correct.
longer proportion of the film than it's pink.
Correct.
Why is she always in pink?
So yeah, it usually in Disney princess media, she usually has the pink dress. But so
Because they sexist as hell.
maybe it's just, I don't know. Does Cinderella has a blue
fun
dress?
fact,
Maybe that's what it is.
years and years and years ago, the colors of pink and blue were gender swap.
Oh.
So it was, it would always be that blue was a very feminine color and pink was the sort of strong manly color. That's why Prince Philip's robes are like the sort of red pink that they are, because that's supposed to be like manly strength. And then it just changed in like the 20th century, pretty much.
You know, I think it's very fun for the technical aspects of this film is that, as we've said, there's a lot of fantastic art in this. When she's walking through the forest, again, whether you're into that kind of like, you know, Once Upon a Dream thing, just looking at the trees in that sequence, you're like, oh my God, like that part where she like, there's obviously the iconic thing who were walking over the log, but there's a moment which I so recognize because when I was looking at the behind the scenes, something that stood out to me about the way that they said that this film was made was they used to work on, say, A4 paper, and then Walt Disney found this like new, like kind of wide format aspect ratio or whatever, which basically meant that they were working on the size of like bed sheets. So it like going from like, you know, drawing on like such a smaller form of paper and then go to something so large was a massive challenge for them, which they relished in, but it meant the backgrounds were huge. And you can really see that when Aurora's walking through the forest and she like walks behind a tree and you're like, wow, this is really like a pop-up book. It's so three-dimensional at that stage. And you know, it really works in that moment, and it looks, you know, like really stunning, really beautiful. Obviously the beginning, the song of like Hail to Princess Aurora, where you see the knights jumping up and down and trotting around. I think that always stood out to me as a kid, being like, oh my God, look at that knight, look at his like helmet and look at the flags and look how regal and everything looks, which has been very influential again to the parks and everything like that. But what also usually stands out to me is that it's not just the kind of drawn visuals, it's also the kind of like special effects. Is like Maleficent, there's kind of like stuff going on there when she turns into the dragon, when they do the kind of the, what do you want to call it, the gifts when they're given to Aurora, and they have those like, you know, lovely songs and stuff. And it's like, again, it's like you're almost going into this kind of like storybook, you know, it's like images of Aurora there sat there and they're like, you know, lips as bold as red, and it's like you see like what almost looks like a night light or something, like birds like flying around in a light effect. I thought all of that is just so fascinating.
It always reminds me of the start of It's a Wonderful Life, where the angels are talking to each other and you have the little stars lighting up, and then when they obviously go to give their gifts, it's almost like little mini galaxies every time. And I even just love the way the fairies, when they come into the room initially, it's like this spray of glitter, and like it, I don't know how to explain it, but it feels like I can't explain it without sounding like an idiot, but it's the most sparkly thing I think I'd ever seen. Like usually when you see like glitter in films, you're like, oh, that's drawn. This genuinely looks like somebody has dropped like sparkles everywhere, and it's so impressive. And especially when like the close-ups of like the stonework on the castle and things like that, you genuinely feel like you're looking at real life and not just artwork. And it's such a testament to all of the skill and everything that went into it, that it does actually not just draw you in as if it's a really good painting, but draw you in as if you're actually watching real life. I know obviously we said earlier that it's not real life, it's just a fantasy, but the artwork is so good that you genuinely feel like you're in a French stone castle.
I mean, I noticed one piece of detail that I never would have noticed as a child because of how transparent the fairies' wings are. But as I was watching it, I realized that when the fairies say a certain word with more emphasis, or when they speed up their sentences, or when they get excited, their wings flap faster and slower. And that is crazy, because what animator nowadays would go to the effort of like matching tone with the wing flaps, which it was just brilliant.
Yeah, and again, I think that adds to what fun and fantastic characters they are. And again, it's that idea of the red, the green, the blue. It's all very bold. And I think the artist that we mentioned earlier, Ivan Earl. So apparently he was like very involved in the production and sort of, was the one who was essentially like a concept artist responsible for seeing through this vision of, this kind of like medieval tapestry, stained glass window. And he had a lot of input then on the colors that were used. And there was a character like Merryweather in which they were like, right, well, she's a blue fairy and we're going to have like, when they become then civilians or whatever you want to call them in the cottage, when she has her kind of like civilian outfit, originally they wanted to give her like waistcoat sort of item was going to be like just a lighter blue compared to the then bold blue of her dress. And he was like, no, make it black. And they were like, no, that's like ridiculous. It just looks so contrasting and so, crazy compared to the blue. And he was like, that's the point. You need to give it weight. You need to give it this like depth. And, that's what they did. And again, that's what does stand out to you watching it, is these kind of contrasts of colors. And with the fairies, like you said, Liv, is there's that translucent aspect to the wings. My favorite shot, I think, in the entire film is when, there's many beautiful ones, but the one that stands out to me is when Maleficent, not when she turns into the dragon on the bridge, but when she's on her tower and she like lifts up her staff. There's the one bit where she like makes the forest of thorns and you get that like little cloud sort of float in. As a kid, I was always just like, ooh, like seeing it just like sort of float in was just very fun. And you can imagine that as a storybook, those books where you got like a little like tab and it moves it along or something like that. But that image of her with the light behind her, and is it when, I think when she turns into the dragon, she says the forces of hell. But this is when she's on the
powers of hell, but yeah.
When she's on the tower and she's just realized the crow has been turned to stone, and she says something, like, you will pay for this or whatever. But when she's on that tower, she walks up to it slowly. The light is behind her, like she is some like evil goddess. She lifts up her staff, and then there's that big swirling like vortex above her. It just looks incredible. Like, I just love that shot. It's just so powerful and so impactful in terms of the colors and the drama of that scene.
But also the fact that she screams over the loss of her. She's not without feeling. This is, the Raven is important to her. And in the same way that obviously Stefan and his wife feel about Aurora, that's obviously how she feels about her Raven. So it's a weird sort of character dimension that you almost don't expect in a sort of Disney villain, is the fact that she's actually very open in her mourning of the loss of, her little sidekick or whatever. And the scream, I think, is really, she has a fantastic scream, which sort of is weaved into her laughter as well, which I really like, because it kind of shows that although there is a range of emotions, the sort of darkness or whatever you want to call it, or the sadness, because presumably she's lonely up there, is just sort of always present.
Well, there's that great moment as well, isn't it? That looks like something that's just painted. And I think one which they use as an example is when she is like put on the bed to be Sleeping Beauty, and they have the blanket. And again, you can see the texture in the blanket. It doesn't look like just like this little additional thing. It's so detailed, but it's that moment in which she like removes her like cloak and she's there like passed out on the floor, and she's like, here's your princess and stuff. It's just so savage, but so visual at the same time. Yeah. Any other moments then for visuals or characters before we wrap up with any other notes?
I'm going to quickly say that one of my favourite scenes is Merryweather stress eating biscuits because she really, really hates Maleficent. I can fully get behind that and support that as well.
She is a great character, and I think that's what adds to the kind of make it pink, make it blue thing. Because even though, again, branding wise, we're a bit like, what, which one is it? But I think for the film, it's a lot of fun. I like that even at the end, the storybook is still changing it between the pink and the blue as it closes. But it's that idea of them battling between it all the time. And I definitely agree with you, Craig, that they do so much as the heroes of the characters as the story. The only unfortunate thing they do is that they let out that the pink and the blue is coming out of the chimney.
Oh yeah, that was the dumb move.
Yeah, but that is just such a fun sequence, and you can sense that tension there because Flora is very much like, I'm in charge, I'm doing this, I'm the one who's got the busybody, and I've got the ideas. And I love Merryweather as this just like, oh well, I don't like it, kind of, it's just, again, it's like what I was saying before, of this archetypal character that they've done, which is drawing from a lot of inspirations, and I think so much of the personality of the actress comes in there. The last thing I would also say is the music.
Yes.
Is just how much of an earworm it is, how iconic it is, partly, as we said, because of the influence of Tchaikovsky, but interesting as well in terms of like blending musical and classical music. Liv, I think you said something about like music being stuck in your head after watching this earlier.
Oh, I've been humming it for the entire day today. Bus stop, work, walking down the street, just constantly, just the same single line of like iconic, absolutely iconic.
Well, I can't sing, so I won't attempt what Liv just did so beautifully. Yeah, no, it is. It's a complete earworm. And I think when I was sort of reading the little book that I've got that goes along with my DVD, it said this was one of the first films where they released the entire score, so not just the big numbers. So it became a sort of the benchmark for how soundtracks became released. But yeah, it blends the sort of classical score, which I think obviously Disney anticipated most audiences would be familiar with, which assumes a lot about how many people are going to the ballet every year. But it blends it with that, as you touched on earlier, Dave, Maleficent's theme, where Sleeping Beauty is completely hypnotized and she's following that, just like, it's almost like a little heartbeat, just the way that they're using the music to sort of draw it in. And it's so well done. And yet it also sort of ties in with the era that it's set. You can hear the sort of lute playing during points of it as well, and those more sort of classical, maybe like harpsichord elements towards the beginning in particular. And actually, yeah, it draws it in really nicely with the era that it's representing, the ballet that it's drawing from, but also this kind of like sweeping soundtrack that a fairy tale of this size deserves. So yeah, I think it's a brilliant soundtrack, and there's moments of little like mischief and fun when obviously you're hanging out with the fairies, but then you do have these quite serious, as I say, kind of sweeping numbers, which I think it balances really, really well. And also the kind of more like, Sleeping Beauty, the kind of more grand and fantasy, but medieval type music, but then also the kind of like lullaby almost music. I think of when they put all the characters to sleep. I remember a few years ago, me and my friends had like a house party, and somebody had sort of like passed out in the spare bedroom, and they were just there all cozy, and I remember playing like Sleeping Beauty on the like speakers, because that's what they were just there, like so cozy. But that music goes so well because it's the scene where they're putting all the kingdom to sleep, and it's just so like melodic and so like a lullaby, just so gentle in the like Sleeping Beauty, and it's just. I
do have a question about that scene though. Inadvertently, how many people do we think the fairies killed by doing that? Yeah, because they're all stood on like battlements, etc. And just so you see them dropping down, I'm surprised you didn't hear like the first Wilhelm scream just like being introduced.
See, I kept thinking every time one of the people standing up in the crowd's holding a banner leant slightly forwards, I'm like, okay, the scene after that, they are crushing 4 civilians with that banner. I also just like, again, go back to the fairies, but the idea of like, oh, we've messed up. Oh, we're so traumatized this has happened. Don't worry, just put everyone to sleep the same way as she is, and we'll like, hopefully it'll be fine by the time they wake up. But it's a good solution because there's so many of these films in which they're like to war, to battle, and everything is messed up by that. So it's a good solution in that sense. And it's very, again, Disney.
Wait, so let me get this straight. You are pro mass drugging of individuals. If only we had turned that to me being like,
every time I come on this pod, Dave, I thought you were this like sweet, innocent guy. And every time I come on here, I learn something slightly darker about you every
This is
time.
because Craig is spinning this thing. I talk about a fantasy magical moment in a film, and then he says that I'm into like
Mash roofies.
yeah, exactly. No, I'm not. I think that they just did quite an effective thing to put everyone and have a little nap, you know. And the king, he's just
See-
there napping and sleeping in his throne. That's all I'm saying.
And everyone feels better
Based on
after the
this,
nap.
maybe they are, but based on this, I think the end game should now become various scenarios, and we have to guess whether Dave would choose drugs or war.
I love it.
What was I saying? The music. This entire
Yes,
point
the
was
music. Only the music I was talking about.
The lullaby type music, which is not used for a sinister purpose. I think at the beginning, one that even though the Once Upon a Dream is very catchy, and yes, I think that often like pops into my head, and it's very, you know, sweeping and romantic. One that always comes into my head is that kind of opening, the like "Hail to the Princess Aurora." You know, it's just because it's so grand, and you know, like it immediately takes you to this idea of like, well, probably not what medieval times were actually like, but the, you know, fantasy of what that is like, and being in this kind of like epic and regal like time with all these like marching knights and different flags, etc.
Yeah, and it's such a layered piece of music as well. Like they just note-wise, they're just all over the place, and it's just really, really effective.
And for what we were saying earlier is the fact that they don't set up the like everyone hates Maleficent or anything, but it sets up a bit of world building of like the town and the village, of like this idea of like hail to the king, hail to the queen, hail to the Princess Aurora. It's giving you the idea of like what is, you know, this world and these rules, and you know, what does everybody kind of like look at as, you know, their most important aspects, and how does this kingdom operate, etc. So then to transition from that to then the music that you get when it's like, you know, a choir, especially within Disney, like when you get it at the end of something like Sleeping Beauty, you know, they always sound like so epic. And when they're doing the kind of like gifts, you know, I love how the choir just comes in and just, you know, like is literally like the gift of, you know, like it's just so.
They do it a bit gentler than that, David. I wouldn't imagine just singing straight in a baby's face. It's just like, ah!
But it's that typical Disney choir thing of like, you know, the end, you know, the sun is setting and the big choir comes in, and it's all bombastic. You know, I think that is really effective. And also, as you were saying, Mary, I think mischievous is quite a good way to put it, is that music which is like do, 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 do. That's a real earworm as well. So
I mean, I just think all round is, I think is belting. I also remember like the end fight scene music quite vividly as well. Just especially when it has to just go into like the sort of really like effectively just sort of stabby kind of music, just because of like Maleficent in dragon form just snapping so much. Also, as an aside, I love that sound effect that they use.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
So cool. The fact they use it for both the staff slamming down on stone and just a dragon is a great mixture. Okay, take those cassettes, rewind them, and play them again, because it's time for VHS Corner. So this time we did have Laura find facts for us, but unfortunately is not able to be here right now. So she has passed them on to David. So what has she found for us this week?
Well, first of all, thank you to Laura Filmer, another good regular on the podcast, for giving us these facts. So Laura has pointed out that Princess Aurora, as we already alluded to earlier, has the shortest amount of screen time for a Disney princess. She's only in the film for 18 minutes. And she also has the least amount of dialogue out of all the princesses. So we were sort of guessing as to that earlier. But that is a fact. Also mentions that the film was in production for 7 to 8 years due to Walt Disney also working on Disneyland at the same time, which I think is quite interesting in the sense that he had like several massive projects on at the same time. I like this one is that it's the only Disney film with square trees, which is something that, again, I think has been then replicated into like the parks in certain areas. Sleeping Beauty was the last Disney animated film to use the technique of hand inking cells before transitioning to zeography. When you look at Sleeping Beauty as a character, apparently Audrey Hepburn's body type and features inspired Aurora's appearance. And then we were talking about reused animation, which was happening a lot at this time, but also happened later on as well. So apparently the animation for the final dance sequence between Aurora and Philip is actually reused in Beauty and the Beast, which is a lot of years later. We're talking about sound effects as well. The sound of Dragon Maleficent breathing fire was created by using an actual flamethrower, which is metal as hell. We were talking about the music as well. Various pieces of Suchowski's Sleeping Beauty from the ballet were used as part of the soundtrack. Prince Philip is said to have been named after Prince Philip, the late Duke of Edinburgh, which is very interesting. Especially because I guess a lot of the regalness and the pageantry did remind me of some of the traditions we have in the UK. Loving Mary's look of disgust at this moment.
I know on that fact, just to add there, I read about this, and apparently the reason it was named after our Prince Philip wasn't for any reason other than that was the only prince the animators had heard of. Or that's what I read anyway.
Would make sense. Imagine if they were just like, welcome the Duke of Edinburgh, and everyone in the film is like, what Duke of Edinburgh? Then Aurora's eye color changes eye color throughout the film. For the forest scene, they look dark, brown and black, yet when she's awake with Prince Philip, they're blue. So almost like, again, pink and blue, brown and blue, is all sorts of color changes going on with Aurora. At the time of release, as we also alluded to, this was a very expensive film. It was the most expensive animated film ever made with a budget of $6 million. So yeah, to then only take like 5 or so, didn't put it in good stead for box office. We also mentioned all of the film's backgrounds were hand-painted by Ivan Earle, and then versions of Sleeping Beauty have been published by both Charles Perrault and the Brothers Grimm. Perrault called her Aurora, while the Grimms referred to their princess as Briar Rose, so Disney split the difference and used both names. In Perrault's original story, there were 7 good fairies, only 3 were used in the film. So yeah, lots of trivia there, some replicating what we've already touched on, some expanding on what we have talked about, and others which, we just completely didn't know about. So, Mary, I guess you know a lot about this film from your love of it. Was there anything there you didn't know, or anything that stands out, or you want to comment on?
Yeah, no, I think I'm pretty sure the move from 7 fairies to 3 was again to avoid being the comparisons to like the 7 dwarfs, etc. I think the storyline sort of combines the Perrault and the Grimm fairy tale. Like, I think it takes sort of the first half of one and the second half of the other, because I'm pretty sure in the Grimm fairy tale they do eat the baby. So there you go. And the Prince Philip thing is hilarious because I am a Republican. I'm not a monarchist by any stretch. And it is hilarious for me because Philip's one of my least favourite Disney princes because his singing voice really gets on my nerves. So the fact that he's named after actual Prince Philip just sort of cracks me up and gives me the ick at the same time.
No wonder there are no ethnic minorities in this film. Philip would just be there on the side, just offending them all the time.
I was actually thinking when I said that Mary's face just looked disgusted when we said that fact as well. I was just like, Mary's like, Republicanism is very clear at this moment. So I'm glad that you clarified that. And also kind of maybe works with the Queen of Scots thing we were saying earlier,
David, is this you trying to fire shots back because everyone's like bullied you this episode? You're like, no, I need ammunition on paper.
No, I'm complimenting Mary. I'm just saying, hey, power to the Scots.
As I say, I don't know why, but Philip in particular, I think because his singing voice doesn't match his speaking voice, and his singing voice is very like operatic and quite pompous. I don't know. He's just one of my least favourite princes, and actually I don't like the royal family anyway.
Also, like when they were talking about Bill Shirley, when some of the behind the scenes I saw of this, and everyone was like, oh, everyone loved Bill Shirley. Like, everyone fancied him so much. And I don't know much about Bill Shirley, but when I saw photos of him, I was just like, why does this guy look so orange in all of these pictures, like especially compared to somebody like Mary Costa, who was like, this like really like beautiful, snow white skin. And I was just like, is this even a thing at this time that this guy is like tanning? Is he like, a Joey Essex of Hollywood or something like that? So yeah, I didn't have as good of vibes from the actor in that sense, but definitely the original story there is quite interesting, and the idea of how it's changed, and there's been different versions of it, there being the ballet, but also the Grimm's story, and then like a book version. And I guess Disney then has free reign to sort of take the different aspects that they want. But But also, yeah, technically this film is very interesting. The fact that you've got, the transition to zeography, the square trees just being something, I think quite fun. The flamethrower as a sound effect.
The flamethrower is amazing.
That's excellent. That honestly makes me love that character even more, if that's even possible.
Okay, so yeah, we've talked all about the trivia there. Again, thank you to Laura for that. We hope you can join us on the podcast soon. So now we go into the legacy of this film by going to the movie vault, which is, for anyone new to the podcast, we like to think of this as a time capsule of memorable movies for someone to dig up in the future. So should Sleeping Beauty from 1959 gain the honor of a place in our movie vault and be remembered for all time? This one, obviously, we talked so much about legacy and sort of inspiration and a lot of love for this film. But we have mentioned some, more sort of troubling elements. So I guess, Liv, there wasn't as much you remembered about this film, and there was elements that you were bringing up in terms of the depiction of certain characters. What's your feeling?
I mean, I would joke that if it's in the Disney vault, it should go into our movie vault. But realistically, for me, even though I didn't remember that much of it, I have spent my whole life knowing that this is the iconic Disney film. And I could never have watched it, and I would still have it up on a pedestal because of the way people talk about it. And because of that, I feel like it just has to go in.
Yeah, I'm sure. Mary, I'm assuming you'd echo those thoughts.
Absolutely. Sassy villain, hilarious fairies, and just the most beautiful, beautiful artwork to look at. It definitely belongs in the vault.
And Craig?
Yeah, this is a hill I'll die on. It's going in.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, it was quite clear, I think, from, again, the vibes and everything we've been talking about. But yeah, into the movie vault goes Sleeping Beauty for, just how much it is inspired animation, how creatively beautiful it is, the music, the performances, the characters. And as Liv said, this being the top tier of Disney movies. So into the vault it goes. Let us know. Do you agree? Is there other Disney films that you think need to go alongside it? We'd love to hear from you.
We're in the end game now.
Okay, endgame time. This is a game I simply like to call Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Screen Coat.
Okay.
So, obviously one thing we talked a little bit about, but not in great detail, was the significance of the pink and blue transformation and the fact that the film itself wanted to have a discussion as to what the primary color should be. I think it's worth noting that there are a variety of different films that dedicate themselves wholly to having one singular color as their sort of dominant color. And what I've decided to do is effectively quiz you all on what those dominant colors might be. So this is a knockout style challenge because there are multiple of you. Yes, that means that Mary and Liv, you will be playing against David as well. David has no idea of any of the films that is going to come up. But basically, I'm going to go through the list. I just want, what color do you think is primarily used by the director, by the creatives of that film specifically? Sometimes it'll be obvious, sometimes it'll be a bit tricky. The first one I'll give everyone will be the easiest one, just to sort of ease you in. Right, is everyone clear on the rules?
Can I just ask, is this kind of like an influential, this is their color, their choice, or is this some sort of technical, somebody has scanned the film and this is the most prominent? Or is it both?
I think it'll be obvious, but it's very much if the film has a particular color palette when it comes to, say, costumes or just sort of the tint that the film necessarily has. But I think it'll become obvious by some of the examples. What I mean by knockout style is that this is effectively an end game where it's last person standing. If you get it right, you move on to the next question. If you get it wrong, you don't. So this isn't a points-based game. This is a who is left standing by the end. If by the end...
The problem is...
Go on.
The problem is, now you've said that, I guarantee I'll get the first really easy one very wrong for no reason whatsoever.
I'm just going to emphasize, if you get the first one wrong, I'm losing respect for any of you.
Wow.
Just to give you an idea of the one that I've just cut out because of the numbers, I've just cut out the film Green Room. And what color do we think is associated heavily with Green Room?
Orange?
I swear to God, Liv.
I'm just glad I've been like alleviated of this whole like roofie thing now that like all that joke was.
Yeah, you're right. I'll excuse your war crimes because of these people just not getting basic colors right. But anyway, we need to understand exactly what it is we'll be playing for. And by that, David, get ready to potentially choose your film. What I should say is if we do get to the end of the end game and there are multiple of you remaining, there is a tie break, which will be a different rule, but I'll explain that if we get there. But first, we need to understand what films people want to suggest for the next episode. So, as always, you have the opportunity to choose your own film or one of your opponent's films. So, let's start with Mary. Tell us a little bit about your film, how it connects, and why you want to suggest it.
So this film is from 1992, and it is a Christmas film, and it's also an adaptation of a classic novel, and it does involve the lead character going to sleep. And from there, the action happens.
Interesting. So this is in the run-up for our Christmas episode. We have a film from 1992, which is involving sleeping. I have a strong suspicion I know what this might be. But David, tell us a little bit about yours.
Yep. Also going with, Christmas, as we got the Christmas episode coming up. And I wanted to go with a slightly different type of Christmas film for this one, and a different choice. I felt throughout the year this year, we've obviously had that balance of kind of like a lot of dark films and a lot of like lighter, fun stuff. And I think that this film kind of in some ways encapsulates that, it adds something quite, sort of like happy to something very tragic and dark. The film is from 2005, and yeah, really encapsulates that idea of like two factions, which is the main link to Sleeping Beauty in terms of, having good versus evil, but ultimately being brought together.
Okay, interesting. So we have David's combined theming Christmas film from 2005. So, Liv, as this is our Christmas episode, what summer blockbuster are you going to suggest for us this time?
What Easter classic will you be getting?
I did consider doing such a thing, but alas, I will tell you that the film I've chosen is something that I will stand by being a Christmas film. I will take that to my grave. It is a Christmas film. If anyone wants to disagree with me, they can. It's a 1997 film. And the link to Sleeping Beauty would be that in this film, there is a princess who is hidden away for her own safety and does not know that she is a princess. So we've got a narrative link there.
Again, I think I might know what that is. But first things first, we need to decide who gets that choice by playing the end game. So are we ready?
Yes.
Okay. To begin, I'm just going to do a random number generator to decide the order. So, David, your number is 3. Mary, your number is 1. So we go Mary, Liv, David. Happy with that?
Yep.
Okay. Mary, what color is heavily associated with the film Black Swan?
I'm going to confidently say black.
You are through to the next round. Liv, what color is heavily associated with the film Purple Rain?
It just feels like a trick question, but I'll say purple, but it feels like a trick.
You are through to the next round. David, what film is heavily associated with the color blue? No, what? Sorry.
I was like, what? Trick question.
Sorry, that's the name of the film is Blue. So the film, right, what color is associated with the film Blue? Sorry.
Blue?
Yeah, it's blue. You're through. I mean,
is there a film called, Color Blue or something like that? So I was like,
you're thinking of the color purple. I wasn't going to choose the color purple.
Or maybe it's like blue is the warmest color or something like that.
Okay. Mary, what color is heavily associated with the Matrix?
Black.
Is that your final answer?
Yeah.
You are out.
Oh.
What?
It's green.
Or the code.
Oh no, I just think of black, all the costumes and all the hair
Yeah,
and
but
the glasses are
yeah,
all
but
black.
like it's got a green tinge over half the
Yeah.
scenes, the coding.
Yeah, all the green coding and stuff like that.
Okay, I'm going to dispute this heavily, but sure, you're now deprived of a good film.
Not necessarily. I mean, these guys could also get it out, in which case I've got to then do another round of these.
True.
So,
Fair.
Liv, what color is associated with the film Avatar?
Blue.
You are through to the next round.
Oh.
David, what color is associated with the film Barbie?
Pink.
You are through to the next round.
I was really worried in the first round it'd be like, what colour is associated with Black Swan? You know, what colour is associated with colour purple? What colour is associated with Murder on the Orient Express? So I'd be like,
I did kind of think you were going to get one like that as well.
Okay. Liv, what color is associated with the film Cries and Whispers?
I spoke too soon.
Red.
You are through to the next round.
Oh! Never heard of it.
It made her feel anger, and that's where it came from.
David,
Yep.
what color is associated with the film Enemy?
Oh, God.
So this one I actually have heard of. I just haven't seen it yet.
I love this film.
I'm trying to think. What years? Can I know the year?
What year is this film out? Do you know?
Oh, I can't. That must be early 2000s.
Yeah, I mean it's a Jake Gyllenhaal.
Yeah, I
film.
thought so. Okay, I'm like, is
Yeah.
this the Jake Gyllenhaal one?
Ooh.
All right, explain.
Grey.
You're going with Grey. David, you are out.
Oh.
So that means that the winner, by virtue of,
Oh, wow.
is Liv. Congratulations.
What was the correct answer then?
Thank you.
Yellow. Oh, I was between blue and grey, so again, I haven't seen it. Well done, Liv. And a very lucky
That was the
there.
most insane win.
Yeah. I would have said
That was
I would have
incredible.
also- I
I'm
also
so
was,
impressed.
I was also thinking grey for that because I was like, ooh, whispers or everything else is grey.
I was just honestly, my process for guessing that was actually what color would Craig go for next.
Okay.
Okay, that's not how I was doing. For reference, I had a list. I was just randomly picking from them.
I mean, I'm getting deep into your subconscious
Because
here.
look,
You-
because if I just went by the list, I would have given you a Snake of June, which was also blue. So I didn't want you to just think I was only giving you ones that the answer was blue.
and then the last person, it's not blue, and you screw them over.
I'll just be glad we didn't have to have an argument about Mad Max Fury Road, which they've described as orange.
Oh, okay.
I'd have gone
Oh,
yellow for that.
I would have said orange
Okay,
for that,
there we go.
actually.
Yeah, I think it's maybe at the start, maybe yellow, but then it turns a bit orangey, I guess. Gold.
This feels very deep to discuss.
Yeah.
But Liv, so that means you are the winner, which means you get the opportunity to choose a film. So do you want to go with your film, Mary's film, or David's film?
You know what? I'll go with Mary's. It was a nice description.
Yay.
Yeah. And by no way influenced by the "you've deprived yourself of a good film" comment, I'm sure.
And also, I feel that this film has just willed itself into the timeline, if it's what I think it is.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's going to be what we both think it is.
Yes,
but
yeah.
of course, we need that confirmation from you, Mary. So what film are we discussing for our Christmas episode?
It is, of course, the one, the only, The Muppet Christmas Carol.
Of course, it's Muppets Christmas Carol. So I'm currently going for a re-listen. So I've just re-listened to the Muppets episode we had, and like just hearing you mention about like Muppets Christmas Carol every now and then, I'm just like, it's a shame that we don't get to hear like a discussion on it. And then here we go.
Yeah, it's again where it's a film that is in the movie vault where we've discussed like iconic Christmas films. We've talked about like the Muppets as a whole, but we've never had a full-on discussion about it. And you know, that's just a travesty because there's just so many great moments. It's such a fantastic Christmas film. And Mary, Liv, both of you are welcome to join us on that Christmas episode and join in the fun. I know when we're talking about colors in films, and I know Mary would maybe agree in terms of a certain item, there's a color that pops in my mind for Muppets
Yeah.
Christmas Carol, which is
Yep. Beaker's red scarf.
It's the red scarf. Yeah. So many angles you can go down. Green for Kermit, but yeah, grey for Scrooge's soul. It's we look forward to discussing Muppets Christmas Carol, such a classic of cinema. I was actually going through a top, it was like a top 50 Christmas films list to kind of look at like, oh, what should I suggest? And that was like 26 or something. I was like, what is going on here? What a travesty.
Who wrote the list?
I also tried to look to get tickets to the like live orchestra version of it, which they're doing in Cardiff.
Yeah.
And there's like, you would have to sit at the back with like nobody like around you that you know. There's like only one seat and like there's about 7 seats left basically. And you're paying like 60, 70 pounds just for those like seats right up at the top. And
to sit in the car park basically.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, oh, why? So maybe next time. But yeah, can't wait to discuss that film. Yep, and well done to Liv, and very gracious of you to hand over the film choice there. Thank you both for joining us in this fantastic discussion of Sleeping Beauty. Definitely some areas that I did not expect to go down in terms of what we talked about, in terms of drugs and nudity. What's going on? I'll just blame Mary. That just happens when Mary comes on, maybe. But thank you guys. It's been a lot of fun. We talked about a very famous film, which is so influential, and obviously in the year that we are celebrating 100 years of Disney. Anything lastly from yourselves, Mary? Anything that you want to shout out, or any socials?
So you can follow me on Twitter at Miss Mimi Peas. The Movie Scramble podcast is back recording again. We just did a podcast there on the strikes and how that's affected how we view summer blockbusters, and we're recording our Halloween special focusing on the Anthony Starr and Lizzie Kaplan film Cobweb, so keep a little lookout for that as well. And
Liv, anything that you want to shout out? I also meant to mention to you the crazy cinema etiquette that you seem to have, in which you took a very peculiar snack to the cinema the other day, which I saw on your socials, which I think you should talk about.
Oh, I have to know what the snack is.
I made a pot noodle just before I left, and I put it in my pocket so the Odeon attendants wouldn't see it, and I sat and ate it during the first 15 minutes of... What was I... A Haunting in Venice.
Oh, good lord.
A Haunting
I
in
live
Venice.
like 5 minutes from the cinema. It's very easy to just have...
That's fine, because as I said it, as I saw it, I was just like, oh wow, that's pretty inventive. But then as I said it, I was like, wait, where did she get the hot water from? I was like, was there a Costa nearby or something? Did you ask for the hot water? But okay, that makes more sense now. But yeah, kudos to you for the inventive.
I do
snack
have
choice.
very makeshift snacks in the cinema, to the point where I've been that very unlawful person who will refill a water bottle with the Fanta on the side.
Oh, okay.
Yes, do not copy me, listeners.
Cinema workers don't listen to this podcast.
I was about to say David does the same, but no, David does the actual moral version of that.
But yeah, anything else you want to mention apart from pot noodle?
Oh yeah, so to improve from previous episodes when I've given my social details, I've made my Twitter handle and my Letterboxd handle match. So now you can follow me by typing in Livy Mac at LIVIMACK, and whilst the Twitter is a lot of aimless thoughts, the Letterboxd has now gotten to the point where I've averaged 4 films a week this year, and I try to give at least a sentence review to each, so it might be worth following. I don't know,
Definitely,
to everyone else.
I would encourage everyone out there to follow all the Well Good Movies crew on Letterboxd, if they're on there, and the Well Good Movies Letterboxd, as you can actually find our movie vault list on there and our list of films that we have reviewed, so you can get an idea of what has gone in and what hasn't gone into the movie vault. So thank you again for joining us, guys. It's been lots of fun. We hope to see you again, like I said, whether it be at Christmas or in the new year, and we'll definitely be taking recommendations soon for what our listeners and our regulars think should be the film we discuss on our 100th episode. So maybe get those thinking caps on for that one. I'm a bit scared of telling that to Liv and what she might suggest, but we'll see. Craig, anything lastly from yourself?
All I can say is at the end of this call, you will be trapped with me, dear David, and all the powers of hell!
To keep up with the latest episodes of Well Good Movies, you can listen to us on all your usual podcast outlets, including Apple, Google, Spotify, YouTube, and more. Don't forget to follow us, subscribe, and rate us where you can to keep our podcast growing. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at wellgoodmovies to keep up with the latest news and highlights from all our episodes, as well as tell us what movies you want to be discussed in the future. So what are you waiting for? Go check out the film we'll be discussing in next time's episode.
All I can say is at the end of this call, you will be trapped with me. Damn it, I messed that up.